So audio is not going before, but it should be at this point.
All right. So we had some informational meetings with you all back in January and February, and the screen that you see right now is a basic summary of what you shared with us. We anticipated that you all would say to us that you expected some additional compensation, and indeed that's what we got. And so that was one of the pieces of feedback that we captured. You also said very loudly and very clearly in every face-to-face meeting that we had and in the survey information that we got, don't take me out of my classroom. The reason that I'm successful is because I'm in my classroom, and while I'm willing to consider taking on a leadership role, I'm not willing to do that at the expense of my students or my classroom. And so that was a very pervasive piece of feedback that we got. You wanted us to think about how could we do this and have a minimal system of documentation, because you said to us you wanted to spend your time supporting your peers and not documenting all the time how you're supporting your peers. Some additional feedback that we got from you was to provide training that is meaningful, and some examples of those were training in EVAS, Project Chris, how to integrate technology, growth mindset, how to give feedback to other adults, and engagement activities and things like that. The last couple of pieces of feedback that we got from you were to create opportunities to be able to collaborate with other teachers. And then finally, and maybe most importantly, if we're going to ask you to consider taking on this role, you ask of us to make sure we provide appropriate training so that you can successfully be a quality colleague in the district. So that's just a summary of the feedback that you gave to us. Based on that feedback, and trying to honor the feedback that you shared with us, we have worked to develop 4 pathways. And you'll see a few columns here. I'm going to share with you an overview of the 4 pathways in just a moment, what that would entail, and then finally what the incentives would be. With your permission, I'm going to go over the 4 pathways first, and then I'll go back to them again and we'll talk about compensation. What I want you to be thinking about as we go over the 4 pathways are, does that meet your need? Are there other pathways that we need to consider that you would be willing to take on in a leadership capacity that would still honor what you said about staying in your classroom? Have we explained it fully, or do we need to do some more explanation? Do we have any pathways on there that you think are not appropriate? And then finally, when we get to the compensation piece, do you feel like the compensation is appropriate? The biggest reason for asking you this now is because there's some policy implications involved with what we're trying to do with teacher leadership. Currently, our policy does not really permit us to compensate teachers during the school day doing what you do. But in order to be, I'm so glad you're here.
Keep going, you're good.
In order to be a teacher leader and honor what you all are saying, you need to be able to stay in your classrooms. And so we had a first reading with our policy committee yesterday, and it was simply a discussion. What you're seeing today is what they saw. They gave us some feedback. Your peers who attended either virtually or face-to-face in the first information session gave us some feedback. Paul and I are going to collect your feedback today. And what you share with us will inform what that final pathway looks like so that we can make some policy decisions with the policy committee and this full school board to try to be able to compensate you in these ways. So if we take a look at pathway 1, so this is about model classrooms. I'm going to give you just a minute to read through this description for those of you that are present and those of you that are joining us virtually, and then I'll point out some specifics of what would be required of this pathway. You don't think they can see? Ah. Okay. So I do need to talk through it for those that aren't here? Okay. So if you're interested in the model classroom pathway, individual teachers or teams of no more than 3 teachers would come and observe in your classroom and collect data through a protocol. What they would collect would be descriptive, not evaluative. They would be collecting some specific information about what they were looking for in visiting your model classroom. We would make sure that what they collect is about instructional core and it's related to an instructional area of focus. So what would be your responsibility if you were to host a model classroom? Small teams of teachers, again, would visit your classroom, and you would conduct sort of a debrief around these sorts of questions. Describe what you saw, analyze the descriptive evidence. What patterns do you see? How might you group the data, predict what students are learning? And if you were a student in this class or in this school, and you did everything the teacher told you to do, what would you know how to do, or what would you be able to do as a result of attending that class? So there's a vetting process that we need to develop around this pathway, if this pathway stays as one of our options. And again, today is about getting your feedback. Let me go ahead and go to pathway 2. And again, I'll go back to all 4 when we get to the compensation piece. Pathway 2 is about peer support. If you look in the description column, this would be quality colleagues committing to support up to 2 teachers in their current school or a nearby school with things like lesson planning, mindset and relationships, or data analysis. Some questions that we got from the first group that I'll go ahead and try to address here. Will it always be somebody in your school? Sometimes it will be somebody in your school. It may be that there's no one, it's not working, is it?
Well, we just need to adjust.
What's
You
wrong
just
now?
keep talking.
All right.
You just can't be in full screen for them to see the advancement, so you don't have to leave it up like
All
that.
right. Then I'm gonna have to
And just hit the
do like this to be able to see it myself. It may be somebody that's in your school, but maybe there's no one in your school that you need to support or that needs your support. So we would try to pair you with somebody in a school that's geographically close to yours. And we would also make every effort to try to pair you with someone who's teaching in a school that's similar to your school, teaching content that's similar to your content, or teaching in a grade level that's similar to your grade level. That's okay.
We're doing a hybrid.
We're doing a hybrid. Hybrid is good. We're being flexible. So in order to be able to serve in this role, there would be some training necessary. And that training would involve instructional rounds format or growth mindset, cognitive coaching, some training on adult learning theory, how to give feedback, and those sorts of things to enable you to support peers. Let me let you look at the next pathway. Am I full screen or not, y'all?
You're not full screen.
I'm not full screen. Okay. Pathway 3 is the professional development pathway. And you would commit to developing and providing professional development learning opportunities for teachers. Those would primarily be around lesson planning, data analysis, mindset, and relationships. Those offerings would grow as we grow what we're calling Teacher Academy. Again, you'll see an asterisk at the bottom of the screen. We need to develop a vetting process to make sure that what's being developed is an exemplar and what we want to share. And again, I'll go back to the compensation piece for Pathway 3 in just a moment. Pathway 4, the last one that we'll talk about today, is about exemplar lessons. So maybe you don't want to have people visit your classroom. That's not how you want to plug into this thing that we're calling teacher leadership. Maybe you don't want to be a person who provides or develops professional development. Maybe you don't want to be a person who's paired up with someone else. This would be a way that you don't do any of those things, but you can still be part of teacher leadership, and this is exemplary lesson plans. Quality colleagues will create 2 exemplar lesson plans, video the teaching of those lessons, and then upload those video lessons to a repository so that others can benefit from that. The other requirement there would be that you host 3 face-to-face or virtual debriefings. So it wouldn't be just a matter of creating the lesson and videotaping it, but you would do that and then also talk with your peers about the lesson that you taught. So let me go back up and talk a little bit about the compensation piece. So our pathway 1 was the model classrooms. If you look in the last column here, what we're proposing, and please understand that this is very much a draft, would be compensation at $100 per classroom for the preparation that goes into somebody visiting your classroom, the conferencing that you would do either before or after that person visits your classroom, and that could be face-to-face or it could be virtual, and the debriefing that would take place afterwards. That would not exceed $500 for 5 sessions or 5 debriefs. Okay, so I'm going to be quiet for just a moment and let you think about Pathway 1 and what would be required in Pathway 1 and the compensation. And if Paula doesn't mind, if you have questions or comments, she's going to record those for us so that we can better tweak this and share it with other stakeholders. Yes, ma'am.
So I'm assuming we get to pick the lesson, the day, and things like that?
Right. No one would show up unannounced. You would know well in advance they're coming, why they're coming, what they're looking for, because you would have to coordinate conferencing them with them beforehand and debriefing with them afterwards. Go ahead.
The whole point of the instructional round process is to be exactly like the medical model. So we go in with a specific lens of something we want to review or get more learning about or see in practice. Then the person talks you through what are you going to see in the classroom, and then going through the open questions, and then you do a debrief. Did I see it? How does that inform practice? How can I actually implement this in my own practice? So it really is just about seeing instruction in action. You know, most teachers, you do the work every day, but you don't get to see other people doing the work. And so a part of that model teacher piece is allowing others to come in to see what they're doing, but also on your end, the reflective piece for you to think about, you know what, is this the best way of getting at it? Were there different things I could have done? Are there things or areas for me to even improve as a practitioner? So it's a two-way piece.
So we would be told what you wanted us to.
No. You would determine the focus. So the instructional rounds model intent is for the person who's being observed to select a focus. Have a conversation in a pre-conference with a group of people. So the way you would probably do it as we set up the schedule, you would predetermine your focus based on the day that people come in and you're going to do that lesson. So that people who want to come observe that or learn more about it, they would determine that that's the class and they want to see. You do a pre-conference and you discuss what that looks like, some questions you want them to look for during your lesson. Then you debrief. So it's just as much learning for you as it is the person that is also observing.
So are there other questions that you have about Pathway 1 or comments that you have about the requirements for Pathway 1 or the compensation? Yes.
I just had a question about all the pathways.
Okay.
So we would pick a pathway.
You could
Or-
pick a pathway or, to use the term we hear a lot, bundle a couple of them. If there were two that you thought you were interested in, you could do that. We would not permit people to do more than two because that's probably too much of a demand on your time, quite frankly. But one or two if you chose to be part of the work. Yes, ma'am.
So not to exceed $500, so basically you do it by time, if they're interested, $100 per visit?
Right.
Okay.
It's possible that there may be two people that come to your classroom in one visit, but the prep that you would put together wouldn't be different whether it was, just a teacher or a teacher and the CC from their school. But it would be the number of visits not to exceed 5 visits, because also, you get a lot of people coming in and out of your room. That's disruptive to you and to your students, and we wouldn't want to create that situation either. Yes, ma'am.
And this, teachers that would be coming to visit are the teachers that are in the Teacher Academy.
So all teachers are in the Teacher Academy.
Okay.
So it could be any of your peers from any school. So, maybe you do a really great job with higher order thinking questions, and there's someone who wants to see a model classroom for higher order thinking questions. So anybody could seek you out to do that. Now, there would be some coordination of that effort, mind you, but it wouldn't necessarily be just this group of teachers or just beginning teachers, but anybody who would want to seek that out as a model classroom. What do you all think about the compensation on Pathway 1? Does it, go ahead, I'm sorry.
I was just gonna say that, you said that people can come and seek you out. So if you have a teacher here who's excellent in this one particular area and you had multiple teachers that wanted to visit that teacher, 6, 7, 8 different sessions, so they would only be capped at.
Right, there would be a limit because we don't want any of this to be a burden or an impediment to what's going on in your class with your students, and they are your primary responsibility. So we would not want to create a revolving door sort of situation.
The other thing is identifying multiple opportunities for expertise to be illustrated in the district. There might be one teacher who does something really well, but we also want to look at the multiple teachers that are across the district that are doing great things, and also open ourselves up for learning from lots of teachers. We have great info.
I'm going to move us to Pathway 2. And again, we talked about that just a few moments ago, the peer support. That's where you would be paired with a peer. And again, that could be any peer. It might be a new teacher, it might be an experienced teacher. Anybody who in their PDP feels like this would be a great support for them that would allow them professional growth. So let's take a look at the compensation part there. So there would need to be some training up front so that you are have the capacity to serve in this role. We're proposing that there would be some spring training that would be optional. That's important to say, and we'll get to the details of that in just a moment. But the going rate for that in the district is $25 per hour. What we'll propose to you in just a few minutes is a couple of dates that happen on Saturdays in the spring. Again, those are completely optional. In fact, when we open it up for registration, we'll find out if the class sort of makes or not. If we only have 2 or 3 people, then we probably won't offer it then. We'll offer it at some other time. But for those people who want to get a jump on this sort of training, that'll be an opportunity in the spring. We also are planning some summer training, which would carry with it a $750 stipend to attend that summer training. Then when we get to next school year, where you're really working with these peers, it would be $1,000 per year, and that would include the planning that goes in to support that person, the before and after school discussion that you may have with that person, the time that you reflect or give feedback on their practice or on their lesson plans, and the other things that are involved in just supporting a peer. So that would be $1,000 stipend. And then we talked a little bit about the success indicators that we would monitor there that are yet to be determined. So let's have some discussion about Pathway 2. Yes, ma'am.
How many times would you be expected to meet with the peer?
So we need you all to help us inform that. In fact, when we shared this with policy committee yesterday, one of our board members said, so exactly how many hours is this? And I had to be really honest and say, we're still figuring that out. So if this is a pathway that we think is viable, that people are interested in, we're going to need the folks who are involved in the work to help us figure out, so how many hours does that look like? And how many contacts does that look like to provide quality support to a peer? So I hate to answer a question with a question, but that's the best I can do today. We have not quantified that number of hours or number of contacts. Right. It's the chicken and the egg, right? You can't decide if the compensation's appropriate unless you know what the time commitment's going to
I mean,
be.
even once a month, I think is fair. If it ends up getting more than that, twice a month, maybe, but I mean, it just.
So the whole goal of this is about relationships. So what we know about successful collaboration that this is about a relationship, about a connection. So we'll need to kind of define some parameters, indicators of what that looks like. But ultimately, we want it to be mutually beneficial, not a burden, like I have to help you, but it's really about how do we grow capacity of people. We believe that we often get better. Meaning from your end, it's thinking about how do I become better at being a support to others. And then from the other teacher end is, how do I begin to learn from my colleagues and figure out how I might use some of those practices within my own practice. So it should be a mutually beneficial type relationship. The other thing is, two people ask questions about mentors. How is this going to be different? Could I still be a mentor? Absolutely, you could still be a mentor, as well as participate in this process. But what I would say is, we need to be careful about capacity, and we need to be careful about you being able to say, what can I doably manage? So if you're already a mentor, I would say you might need to reflect on what else you could take on. Maybe you just take on the model background, or maybe when you talk about some of the other pathways, you work on the exemplary lesson plan. So it's going to be really important for you to know for you, what's your current time investment to say, what can I logically take on? Because the peer support piece is going to be really about developing a relationship. And so the compensation is a little bit more for that, because it is going to be a little bit more. So
I think it also matters if the teacher is in your school. Because then you would just
Right.
know, I get to go downstairs, I can talk to them.
Right.
If you're going across town, or,
Yeah, to the extent possible, and it's similar to what we talked about before, you would be paired with someone in your school or someone geographically close to your school. You would not be paired with someone all the way across town. Now, I put an asterisk beside that, because if you're a Latin 3 teacher,
not many.
there's not many Latin 3 teachers, that may be a bad example, but so The more obscure the course is that you teach, the fewer people that might be considered peers. So I put an asterisk beside that as I say it. What I think I heard you say, and I would love some discussion on this, is this compensation looks appropriate if the expectation is once a month, not to exceed twice a month. So I'd love for you all to have a conversation about that so we can capture that, that sort of feedback
This would be in the same content area, right?
to the extent possible. Yes, yeah.
Because I think I would have a really difficult time connecting with someone in a different.
Right. We're not going to take a high school physics teacher and pair them with a kindergarten teacher. That wouldn't be beneficial to anybody.
It is closely matched as possible, but elementary could be K2 continuum, or an elementary. But like high school math, I was most likely. You would be with another high. school
Right,
math. It might
right.
not be calculus with math 1, but it would still be.
So if we're saying this would look like once, not more than twice a month, what do you all think about that in terms of hours? Let's say if it were once a month, how many hours are appropriate to work with a peer if you touch base with them once a month? 2 hours? Okay. A range 2?
School year.
Okay.
This-
Okay.
Maybe a certain number of hours and 1 or 2 sessions, you might do 2-hour-long sessions a month, or you might do 1 longer one.
Okay.
And especially like the beginning, you might do more often, and then later you do a longer one because you've got more.
Right. So you need us to quantify that, but also leave some flexibility so it doesn't have to be lockstep every single month.
Yeah.
Is that what I'm hearing? Okay, so quantify the number of contacts and the number of hours, and then a total number of hours.
Well, and I think, and I'm gonna speak here. So what if you meet your person on the weekend? You know, I'm just throwing it out there. Some people might say, instead of trying to do this 5 times over the month, I'm gonna meet my person over the weekend, and you might do more hours. And getting into that place where I spend more time with that person, do I spend less time with them next month, how do I balance it out? Yes, we do need to have some guidelines for being so stringent about it, but there's not flexibility. I don't think we want to pigeonhole it. I think we need to have minimal expectations for content. I think it's.
Are there other comments or suggestions or questions that you have about Pathway 2 that will help us inform pathways going forward?
So the people who we would potentially be paired with, because you just said all teachers are hard teachers.
Correct.
So is it like a specific group of teachers?
So the entire academy is driven by PDP. The vision, the goal, is that we would have a document that shows the different kinds of supports the district can offer. And the teacher, working with his or her administrator in developing that PDP, and we're talking in the fall, not right now, because we're at the end of a PDP cycle, might decide that peer support is appropriate to put in that teacher's PDP. Probably that would be few and far between, but there would be, I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
I don't know.
No, go ahead.
It's based on the administrators.
Right, it's going to be driven by the PDP, so that would be an option that some administrators may decide would be part of some teachers' PDP.
So knowing that these pathways are a part of building teacher capacity district-wide, that menu, once approved by the board, will become an available option that, as Amy was talking about, principals working with teachers one-on-one says, hey, I believe you could benefit from a peer coach, or would you rather do a peer coach or do X instead? So that becomes a part of their PDP, and that's the piece that could be monitored.
Yes, sir.
You thought about maybe making it a small group of 3 and maybe tailor it more.
We can throw that in as an option.
A small group of 3 for the peer support.
Right, so maybe we work with 2 or 3 people. I mean, you have more people bounce ideas off of.
You mean together, or that they would be assigned, like kind of an assignment?
Right.
Sorry, just going back on.
But that would be an upper limit. That wouldn't be a starting point. Is that what you're saying?
You'd probably save the district money if you pay 1 person instead of paying 3. And, you've got more people to talk to.
right.
And then you also got, well, you know, 3 other people to get to know, and that's not, it's gonna take a little more time, I think.
I would also say, as she talks about especially pathway 4, there's some opportunities in the other pathways to think about some of the small collaborative groups for that professional conversation that might not be more like a peer support, relationship where it's time intensive. Maybe it's on a topic, so it might be some kind of professional development, or maybe it's about a specific concept through a lesson plan that you still collaborate, and there are other pathways that you help.
So are there other comments that you want to make or clarifying questions or suggestions? Sure.
I have a question for all of them, as far as, in order to do tutoring, they'll tax you at a very high rate. Is this strictly the amount that you're showing, is that the amount, or are you getting like taxed at
So
43%?
anything that you receive is taxable, and that we don't have any control over. What we do have a little bit of control over is whether it's part of your regular check or it's separate from that, and some control, and Paula can talk more intelligently about this than I, some control over when that check is generated, which I'm told has an effect on the taxable amount. So we're trying to make that as low as possible, but it will be taxable income.
So just as an FYI, if you get with your regular expense, you have what is lower, and if you got a separate check on the system. The goal would be to try to pay you on a consistent basis where you can get the least amount of taxes even though you are. The difference between about 47% and I think 41, 42%. It's not huge, it's still.
I did government teachers network, and my stipend was paired in with my actual paycheck, and it was taxed extremely heavily.
And unfortunately, we don't have a workaround
Yeah.
for that. I wish we did, but we simply don't.
But because that's the case, you might want to bump up some
Right,
compensation too.
right,
We're looking at it, immediately, we're not trying to get.
Right.
I'm not getting $100, it's just.
right. You may go in the hole if you're paying for
It's just not worth
childcare.
it.
Mm-hmm.
You get half of that.
Well, and in full disclosure, and I guess I should talk a little bit about why the pay compensation were raised, and that's a lot about what's currently the pay compensation for the structure. So for instance, the current mentor, pay rate per mentee is $50 a month. So we multiplied that, because it used to be $100 a month. So we were trying to say, can we make the investment a little bit more robust than what we know it currently is, to invite teachers to say, you know what, this is more worth my time investment than what I might currently get if I do. So we know it's not perfect. The other thing is that we want to build this culture where it's about respecting and honoring the work and the value teachers bring to the profession, but also providing some compensation for the extra time that people do.
Or any other business experts.
You're exactly right.
Sure.
I just had another question, because you said that it's gonna be a part of the PD, possibly if you're gonna pick pathway 2. So say I pick pathway 2 and my strength is like the science,
Mhm.
fifth grade science, but then fall rolls around and I'm not paired with anybody. But then I've gone through all the training
Right.
to be a
So
peer.
that's one of the reasons that it's a bit broken up. So you would be compensated for having gone through the training, and then separate and apart from that, compensated for being paired with someone. Because to your point, there may be a semester where you're not paired with someone. We don't know exactly how many people are going to take us up on this, to be honest, nor do we know exactly how many administrators and teachers are going to say, yes, I want this to be in my PDP. So that's why the training that you would go through is compensated separate from the actual support of a peer.
But we can say, when we talk to principals about this very same issue, one of the things that we've heard loud and clear is, I want to use the people in my building. And I want to leverage the strengths and the talents of the folks in my building to work with other folks in my building. I don't want someone coming from across town. And so the whole point behind this was to see how many people can we find in buildings to help provide support for this work. So people in their own schools can be teacher leaders, because that's what we want, right?
The other thing that I would say to your question, because I heard you say science teacher, if you look at the primary content of this pathway, it's about lesson planning, which cuts across all content. It's about mindset and relationship. It's about data. It might be about classroom management. So in some cases, if somebody's working on classroom management or student engagement, the fact that you're teaching science may not matter. In some of these pathways it will, but in some of these pathways the content might be irrelevant depending upon what we're trying to work on. Let me move us to pathway 3, which is the professional development pathway. Some of us who are leaders have a skill in developing and providing professional development. And this would be lesson planning, data analysis, mindset, and relationships. And that's going to grow. What we need in the district and the professional development that we need delivered in the district is going to grow. If you look at the incentive part here, and again, this is based on a precedent in the past, would be $500 per approved PD offering. And that includes the time that you've put in to develop it and also the time that you would put in to deliver it. So let's have some conversation if we can, questions, comments, suggestions about pathway 3.
Is that just a one-time meeting, like I come in and have an hour or hour and a half?
So it would be per approved PD offering. So there could be multiple times that you present.
The compensation would be for one, or is it gonna be?
So we would decide what exactly that looks like. So say if you're gonna do a series on lesson plans, and we had a 3-part piece, we would make sure that the compensation, because right now the compensation for delivering PD is about $75 per hour. So we jumped that up to almost 100 per hour, but it's not pure. We gotta figure out how many times would you be offering PD that would equate to that piece. So we decided we didn't put per hour, but we're trying to decide as we develop these professional development. So theoretically, what did we say? A series module is 5 hours, right? 5 hours of PD. It might be that you deliver it twice, but it's still 5 hours of PD that you can compensate for that. Which would include your planning session.
Oh, is that up to the principal?
No, it would be up to, as we get these approved and the board piece for consistency, it would be more throughout the teacher academy.
And where would the PD be? Where would we do it?
So it might be face-to-face, and it could be like here in the ed building. It might be after school. It might be that you build something that is completely through Haiku that's PD. It might be something that's blended. We're open to a lot of different options in terms of PD. And again, I know y'all get tired of us saying that, but if this pathway is viable, we need you to help us decide what those options would look like. And if you develop something phenomenal in lesson planning, how many times would you be expected to present that? So like I said, for now, and I know it's hard to answer that question, and we're saying, tell us what you think about compensation. And you're saying, but you're not telling me how much time it's going to cost me. For now, we're trying to think about, are these viable pathways? And are we at least in the ballpark on the compensation? And then we need you to help us figure out the details. What would be reasonable in terms of expectations?
Offering these would need to be things that they're not modeled off of somebody else's model or adapted from. They have to be independent,
So
not copyrighted.
right.
And understand how much.
You could not use anything copyrighted, but you'd be hard pressed to build a professional development that doesn't link to anybody else's work. So as long as you cite, the work that you're building yours upon, then you would be fine. Yeah, I don't think anybody's going to come up with a PD that nobody's ever done before, is not based on somebody else's work. Otherwise, it'd be hard pressed to say it's research based, right? Yeah.
The other thing is just making sure that one is applicable. I mean, we hear from teachers all the time, well, we want to see people working on the work, and then we want to have something that we can take out to do for nurses. So I mean, having some guidelines and expectations of what that looks like. And it could be something as simple as how do you plan and process for this? And here's how this actual lesson, how I did it in my classroom and had some dialogue. I mean, that is just as much professional learning as telling somebody about theoretical practice and truly making it hands-on and applicable to the work.
Do you have a question?
I was just gonna say, I know I have a really hard time when I sit in professional development and an English teacher's up there saying all this cool stuff she gets to do with a book. I can't take that to my math, so I think that it needs to be really outlined that an elementary school teacher is doing this, because I don't know how much I would be able to take away and apply, and that is something that's really frustrating really hard to make math like really cool when you get down to the nitty gritty. You have skill or you don't.
Mhm.
So I think that that would be really important because it's hard to get those catered to each level.
Standard,
Yeah,
actual
it's
standard.
very
Right.
hard to do that.
And,
So-
you know, there's an asterisk down there on the bottom of this one that talks about a vetting process. This is where our program managers, not that they won't be involved in others, but very heavily involved in this part. So I can't look at a Math 2 professional development and tell you if it's quality or not. So I need somebody else to do that. Or if it's, you know, guided reading, I need somebody else to do that. So, and I don't know if that's exactly the point you're trying to make, but our program managers will be very involved in the vetting of these to make sure that it's high quality, that it meets a need, that it's going to be useful to the audience for whom it's intended, and that sort of thing. Other questions or comments on Pathway 3? So Pathway 4 is about exemplar lessons. And again, if you don't want anybody in your room, if you don't want to have to work with anybody else, I'm being facetious a little bit. You know, if you don't want to stand up in front of anybody else, this might be your pathway. So this is about developing exemplar lesson plans. This would be another place where we're really going to rely on our program managers and or their coaches, because in as much as I can't look at a Math 2 professional development and tell you if it's high quality, I can't look at a Math 2 lesson plan and tell you if it's spot on or not either. So they'll have to help us with that. But the compensation piece here, or the incentive piece, is $500 for the planning and uploading of the lessons, and then facilitating the discussions with colleagues. And that is enumerated a little bit in the middle column where it says 3 face-to-face or virtual debrief sessions. So there'd be work on the front end to develop it. There'd be a process to vet it to say, yes, this belongs in the repository, and then an expectation that you would debrief in some way with your peers. And that might be one peer, or it might be a group of peers. And the compensation here is $500. Yes, ma'am.
Two things. One, how long will the plan be? We're talking about, 2 to 3 days, we're talking about a week lesson?
No, like a day to a 2 or 3 day lesson plan.
Okay, so 1 to
Mhm.
3.
Not a unit plan. We're not looking for unit plans.
Okay. 1 to 3 days, and I'm just thinking, if this is $500 and it's the same as the PD, I mean, most folks, unless we go with the, hey, I could just put up this instead of actually getting in front of folks.
But you will be
But it's only
facilitating
the
the
3
group,
people instead of,
but it's still processing through the information, reflecting on whether it's a video lesson plan or the quality of the actual lesson plan. It still will take some preparation. So it is still professional learning. or
do you think
professional
as
development.
much? I mean, the compensation is the same.
Well, but I think it's about the planning and the preparation. So the fact that you shouldn't go in there blind, and that's why we're trying to make this hefty. So you diagnose, why does this align? What are some things that we want students to walk away and be able to do? Going back to some of that instructional rounds process, but reflecting on the actual written lesson plan. Or what are some different ways we could have done it?
But what I think I hear you say, and you correct me if I'm wrong, is that the professional development pathway seems to require more time and effort than this one, and the compensation is equivalent. So that's a question that we need to think about, especially if a lot of people see it in that way.
And the lesson plan that she's talking about too, I mean, I think at this point, when the folks that are in here, we gotta do that. I mean, that's kind of natural. So, for me, at least, this seems much easier. But the PD, is also, an option, so I was wondering, like, what size group would we be talking about? I mean, like, do you have any idea, would it be 10 people
You
or
mean for the
50 people?
professional development?
Yeah.
We would have to make a cap for the criteria, and then think about the group.
I'm sorry.
Targeting specific professional development and really trying to create a menu of the offering, so.
I think that would matter, that with a lot of teachers, how large it is.
Well, I think it would matter how large it is, but it also matters what's the content and who is the target audience. So is this gonna be, primary K2 teachers, or is this gonna be for science? It's gonna be really applicable to content, or is it really more focused on pedagogy, which I think would make a huge difference on who might come versus if it's specific locked into a subject area.
Or whatever PD we chose, was what we thought we were the best at. So, it would be,
But what I'm saying is, it would be varied. So somebody offering a math session is gonna have a lot smaller audience than somebody who's offering a session on formative testing. Somebody just
management and
right.
But we would not ask
Captain.
anybody to try to facilitate a session with 150 people in there.
No,
Because that's a meeting, that's not learning, right? So we're probably talking, we would cap it at 30 or something reasonable that's similar to, class sizes. So it would be a reasonable number. And I would say the same thing about the face-to-face or virtual debrief. It might be 3 or 4 people if you're doing virtually, or it might be 30 people if you're doing it virtually, but we're not talking a couple hundred people in a room and you're trying to do professional development. It would be a reasonable number and typical for what you do in your classroom and your class size. Yes, ma'am.
Possibly part of the collaborative learning conference, not just training on these things. At times when there are multiple offerings for people to choose from.
Yes. Yes. And it may even be possible for this one coming up. In all honesty, it's a push, but it may be possible. Yeah.
Part of the piece for the second, 2 days that we're gonna offer for professional development, when we talk about development content for the students as one of the opportunities to launch the professional development.
So other comments or clarifying questions or suggestions around Pathway 4?
I guess I'm not clear on the hosting face-to-face. Say I do a math video, and then somebody's obviously watching that, and then I'm gonna debrief with the people that watched it?
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
Mhm.
Math,
You set a time up, so everything is kind of driven by a schedule. So once we know what pathways you want to participate in, then we'll start asking more specific questions about what's your availability, when will be time that you want to do this, some timeline for submitting the exemplar. So all of that is going to be driven by what you have.
So let's talk a little bit about next steps. And I referred earlier to some Saturday, I'm gonna call them opportunities. Do you like it when I call it Saturday opportunities? That's a spin now, isn't it? So we are currently recording your feedback on the pathways, the support that you feel like you need, and the compensation that you think is appropriate, given what we know. And we understand that some of these questions are really not answerable yet because we're building it together. We will make the necessary modifications to the pathways based on your feedback. And I hope that it was implicit in the 4 pathways that we shared that we really did hear you say, I don't want to be out of my classroom. Because we feel pretty good about the fact that we honored that, but we would want you to call us out if you think that we have not. There are some policy implications for the pathways, and we've begun to work on that with our policy committee within the school board. Because right now we have policies that preclude us from compensating you for doing some of these things during the school day. So we understand that there may need to be some tweaks of policy or some additional policies that allow us to do that. The first reading was yesterday, and they ask a lot of the same questions that you all are asking. If I go to the advanced teacher training, Dr. Wilkins and I are going to offer a couple of sessions if we get enough folks that are interested. Saturday, April the 23rd from 8 to 12. I'm sorry, excuse me. I should have fixed that before today because it was wrong last time and I didn't fix it. Saturday, April 23rd, the coaching model and coaching other adults. And then Saturday, May 7, and I'm saying that, emphasizing that for our folks that aren't in the room, that should be Saturday, May 7, not May 5. We'll have a session on instructional rounds. These are completely optional. You can opt into these on the Saturdays if you're interested. You are not required to participate in these. You would be compensated at $25 per hour with a stipend. If you choose not to participate in these on Saturdays, that does not preclude you from participating in Teacher Academy or being part of the advanced part of the Teacher Academy. These will be offered again. So just full disclosure, I don't want anybody to leave here thinking, well, I'm not doing Saturdays or I'm not willing to do Saturdays, so I'm out. It's just an opportunity if people want to go ahead and sort of dip their toe in the water, that you can do that. The other thing I'd say is if you decide to participate in these and then you say, this is not for me, that's okay too. You're not committing to anything by participating in these sessions either. Questions about April 23rd or May 7? May 5 is not correct. May 7 is correct. We would prefer that if you do one, you do both.
And, you register for them?
We will. We've got it in.
They're up right now. If you want to leave here, we'll also send you an email, like we did with these, so you can register. We'll also send a PowerPoint. You have a PowerPoint and the date. If you would like to participate, we would honestly like to know by that first week in April, by April 7th, just so we
we're moving forward with this Saturday.
Yeah, we're looking for 10 people. If we get to 10, then we're going to make sure that we offer it. If we're less than 10, we may not, because we consider it a Saturday opportunity too. So we're looking for 10 folks. Questions about this information? Yes, sir.
How invested is the district in this?
Very. I would say that our superintendent and senior leadership is very much on board. It was certainly our impression last night in policy committee and at the school board meeting that our school board is very much on board. And they believe in teacher leadership and the potential that it has to move us forward as a district.
Well, and one of the things about, Dr. Emery is really, there's a little small book project, and the teacher project called Irreplaceable. And it's about recognizing our top 20%, how we retain them in the profession, how we keep those things to honor their work in the city. So this dovetails nicely into the administrator conversation about the irreplaceable, and now the second part is how do we honor the irreplaceable.
Oh, that's nice. Can I ask how many there are, people in like how many of them?
Over 100. And again, so here's the struggle that we've had, good, bad, and indifferent, and we recognize that this is one piece of data. We use one piece of data to identify the group. And what we know about data is it can exclude or it can include. And what we've done initially is we've chosen an exclusive data. So we know this is not final. We need to look at additional data points to make this comprehensive. So as we grow and as we learn more, we get your feedback. We're working on additional indicators to determine how do we identify people who need support and how do we provide everybody support. So it's not about do you need support, it's just about identifying how do we differentiate the support based on what you need. And that's a very different conversation because everybody can use room for growth. And that's where we're coming from. And the other piece is we want to honor the great work that we know is going on in schools.
Well, a real easy way to add to that would be our evaluations, they're already done. They're already done, the scores are kind of, I feel like, a really good thing to use, just like any other business if you're doing something, but, so would evaluations, and that would be something new.
Right, so, and we've talked at length about evaluations, is that something that all certified staff have?
Right.
And I suspect that people have called it Teacher Academy 2.0, that's going to be a data point, because right now the data point that we use, there's some folks in the district who don't have that data at all, good, bad, or otherwise, they don't have it. One of the things that we need to make sure of before we use evaluation data as a data point is that we norm what that looks like from one classroom to the next and from one school to the next. So we want accomplished at school A to look the same as accomplished at school B. And we're not certain that we're there yet, but we intend to get there.
School A and school B, and they were different.
Okay, so you understand our intent to do that, but our trepidation as we go there to make sure that, we've normed what is proficient, what is distinguished, what is accomplished.
The other good thing about the TV is that would actually give all of us the check off on the, what's past accomplished.
Distinguished.
Distinguished, that's what I'm thinking of,
Mhm.
my own TV.
Right, yes, ma'am.
Thinking about the people that I think we all know who are doing bang up jobs, but they're doing their part, but the scores don't
Right,
necessarily show.
right.
the
So our
work that they're doing.
our intent, when we get to these additional data points that we seek your input on, and we sort of got a plan for how to capture that, is that those data points would be an or. So if you have this data point or this data point or this data point, because if it's an and, then we're at exclusive again. And while we want this to be, an elite group of folks, we don't want it to exclude folks that are doing that great job. So we do need to have additional data points, and we want it to be an or and not an and.
And the question was just raised here, what if we're not doing next year? So one of the things that we tried to start off with is it just wasn't 1 year. 1 year of data can, give us kind of comprehensive look. And though we're looking at student outcome data, we still looked at the 3-year average to say, is this a consistent pattern that this person can make over time? And so as we look at other data points, I would imagine we're
continue to look at consistent types of things that I noticed.
Well, for the last 13 years, I'll tell you, grade, that's the only DOG in science, there's no science, there's for 6 and 7. Long story short, I actually moved to Charleston over the summer and came back, and it was not an 8th grade position at my school, and I took a 7th grade position. So I'm not gonna have it, you know, it seems like we could use the benchmark data, I mean, growth is growth, right? Why wouldn't we be able to use some of that other?
So to some extent, that would, I'll answer that one. That would convolute the purpose of the benchmark. So we would not want to make any sort of decisions, and this is just me in my opinion, but I would not want to make any decisions about teachers based on benchmark data, because benchmark data is intended to be formative and is intended to help inform instruction going forward for students. So I wouldn't want to use something that's in.
I mean, science curriculum is completely cut quarter by quarter,
That's
so it's
true, but the students are still in the learning process, right?
Yeah, I would just say anything that's intended to be formative, I would not want to use to make decisions.
Have them also for the 6th and 7th grade. If everybody, you know, I just feel like it's fair for everybody to go ahead and be evaluated, students and teachers,
Right.
not just 8th grade.
Right.
But I think
it's
your point
beneficial,
that
not
you
bad.
made-
Yeah, I
the point
understand.
that you made started off was, why aren't we looking more at things like evaluation? Why aren't we looking at things like engagement, so parents and students, how do I respond as a teacher? So we're trying to get to that place where we can look at other indicators that give us an idea that are not just student outcomes. And that's one big piece of the puzzle, don't get us wrong. I mean, it is important, but there are also facets of the work of a teacher. How do you illustrate leadership? How are you leading in your school currently? So if we think about the teacher leader standards, you know, teachers advocate in their classrooms, they advocate in the district, and they advocate for the profession. So how are teachers embarking upon that work? And how do we begin to identify them based on those 3 things? The classroom is great, but we want teacher leaders. Yes, leaders in our classroom is important, but we need more leaders and we need a profession. So identifying other ways that we can do that.
Right. And our goal would be to get to a set of data points such that everybody is in the potential pool to be tapped as a leader. So, you know, to your point, our folks that are in physical education or our folks that are in the arts. Now, I know ASW is out there, and there's some talk about in being inclusive with ASW, but we're not real comfortable with that process yet either. But we do have to get the data points that make it possible for all instructional staff to be in the pool.
The other question was raised about the summer. Did you put those in there?
I did, because they were wrong, remember?
No.
Summer, no, I do not have summer dates on there because they were so tentative that I did not.
So how about this, for summer, we have some proposed date ideas, somewhere somebody sent an email to me about what this.
Right, so I mentioned them, they were not in the PowerPoint, but the first group that was here last week said that they overlap with summer school. So it seems like it was July 20, give me a July 20 something, that's a Monday. 21st, somewhere around in there. The point, and again, I didn't have it in the slides, but the dates came up and we were told that that was going to conflict with summer school. And some of the folks that we're talking with are the same folks who are sort of being recruited, for lack of a better word, to teach summer school. So that's yet another reason why I would say those dates are really, really tentative. We don't want you to have to choose one or the other.
Is that what you're saying?
We've got, yeah, but the dates of that and the number of days is extremely negotiable. Because you're great teachers, but you're entitled to have a life too, right?
Well,
Mhm.
the other thing is we're trying to make this all in. We do want to set an expectation of consistency, so like with the 2-day launch for PD, we do want you to attend those days. But of course, somebody says, I already had something scheduled for this Saturday, can I make this up at another time? We will figure out how to make it work. We do want to promote as much as possible consistency, but we also want to make sure there's flexibility. So this shouldn't be another thing that if you don't do it this way, we will not allow you to, because it is about capacity and building district capacity for change for teachers.
If I say that in my words, I would say this is a buyer's market. You have a lot of power and a lot of influence, and so you should exercise that power and influence, because the fact of the matter is we need you.
Boy, that feels nice. I mean,
Other questions, comments, concerns, suggestions, things you want us to think about that we haven't thunk about? Yes, ma'am.
Actually success, you will definitely provide, give us, and let us know what evidence we need to provide you. So that, we have to follow through.
Exactly.
We want to really monitor their effectiveness.
Right.
So you will give us indicators of what we will need to provide you
You got it.
to make it, that kind of.
So I hear
follow-up.
I hear two things in your comment. I hear documentation, which would be the ongoing piece, and then the indications of success. And you would want to know both of those things going on. So what am I responsible for turning in or logging on or whatever that says I'm doing what the plan of work I've committed to, and how are you going to measure whether I was successful in the end? And being completely transparent, those have not been decided yet, but we have a plan. And that's part of our timeline that's going to happen in June and July to say, and this is how we're going to measure if this is successful or not. So you'll be fully aware of those indications.
Kind of like the first week. And once they say, yes, we agree with this, it's fully supported, then it's all of the useful pieces for communication or documentation and for expectation and for success.
Other,
So far, everything is, you don't have to commit yet, or
we're still at the you don't have to commit yet.
if you have an idea when you
We're probably talking by the end of this school year. We're going to need folks to,
The other thing, Kathy, is it might be you're not ready to opt in now, you might want to see how this goes with the work before you join later, and that's okay. And we know we will have some later adopters who are just like, you know what, I have a lot going on in my life, can't commit this kind of time, let's see how this goes with that person, circle back to me, and maybe it's something I can invest in. So there will become a point where we will say, here's the first group, we're gonna use these skills who participated in X to help us with this. But it doesn't mean we won't start the next cohort for people to continue.
Right.
So don't feel like if I don't join on this ship now, I won't get an opportunity to jump on the boat.
but when we get to early to mid-June, we're going to need to have some idea of who's willing to stick their neck out there with us for this 16, 17 pilot cohort. You got it. You got it. Other questions?
Anybody else on that?
So there's lots of work like this going across, frankly, across the country. And we're talking with other districts and looking at their framework. Right now, we've sort of built our own ship. And now we're at the point where we want to look at our framework and the framework of others that might be ahead of us and say, so how do we tweak this? Or what have we forgotten? Or what did they do that they know didn't work, so we don't go down that same path? And those sort of conversations are happening now and will continue through June. So this is a very hot topic in education in general. I can't say that ours is necessarily based on any prototype. It's based on the research we've done so far. And now we're ready to say, okay, we've got this sort of conceptualized in our head. Let's look at how other people conceptualized it and see if we can build something that's going to work. Other.
So does this feel good, or does this really concern you, does this excite you, like, give us a pull?
Well, I think it's very nice to feel valued. 15 years or however many years, 20 or 7 or whatever, to just feel valued as somebody that's performed. It's very nice, because really up to this point, I don't think, like I tell my mom, I've got up my kids. I said, I'm going to a meeting where everybody's been successful for 3 years. I'm really like, we've never had a meeting like that, because I could be sitting beside a person right next to me who on paper really looks great. You go in and it really, the kids are just lousy. So I really feel like that's very nice for women, really. I think it's exciting to kind of think that we're gonna do things not just by the footnote. This is what was good for this particular school, which would be the same as what would be good at other schools. There's lots of demographics and just different cultural things that work different in different classrooms. And because that's kind of sensitive, we tend not to talk about real things that actually happen in our classrooms and make it work. And it feels like this is the most safe so far that I've felt
think it's fair to say that we're at a point in the district where we realize that there's some untapped capacity, and you all represent that untapped capacity. And so if we're gonna, the phrase we hear a lot is if we're gonna move the needle, we need the people that have demonstrated they can really move that needle to help us figure this out. Yes, sir.
I kind of applaud the idea. I think it's kind of rare to find a district willing to commit to this teacher leadership kind of academy to use this capacity that's already here. I've done some work like this. Most of the work like this is initiated from the state level, rarely from the district level. So I applaud the district for the idea. A lot of times I do think the colleagues, the people who work in the district, pairing them, especially with the peer support, can be very powerful because it's the person that's working in the district with me. They're not outside the district. We understand the same thing. The initiatives are going on. So I think it's a good thing.
And based on what we heard today, it sounds like, and don't tell them I said this at DPI, that we're a little bit ahead of the state. I think they're working on the same work, but I don't think they're where we are yet.
They have to deal with a lot of politics and stuff, which many years ago I did work with them assistance anymore, where they do engage in some of this type of work. But I think it's a good thing.
And you said the district supports it. I think it's clear too that our community partners very much support this kind of work. So there's a whole district and a whole community behind you.
So one question was raised, and I know it's a really great question, a while back. The question was raised, so who do we get to address with our? So as we talk about the whole coaching and peer support, one of the pieces before you're gonna go out there and work with other people, you will be working with each other. So that will be a built-in part of support for professional development for you all before you're either delivering PD or coaching another adult, to really have some of those conversations with each other to think about your own life. So that will be an advantage of this.
I think it's important that we're real people in the classroom. I'm kind of exhausted from hearing from people who haven't taught in 15 or 20 years, because I feel like it's a different game now. Not that I've been around for that long, but I know it's different than when I was in school, and I'm just kind of tired of professors coming in and giving lectures on this is what I teach my kids. Well, you're not even in a high school. So I just think that's really valuable, that we are the people.
Right.
And I crave working with other people at other schools, and I don't ever get that opportunity. So I'm kind of excited to step in someone else's classroom. I know what's going on at my school. I don't know what's going on anywhere else. I'll go anywhere in the county to see what's going on, if it's something good. So I'm kind of interested to see for my own growth, and then if that's a reflective piece to see what someone's doing that I can help also.
Right. You all have far more credibility with your peers than a person like me, and that thought has not escaped us. It's been a little while since I've done it too.
I was gonna say kind of on that, I know the first people you talked to said, one thing in my classroom, which I agree with. It's hard to visit and not be out of your classroom, so is there some creative way to, take us somehow out of some roles at our current school during May? I don't know.
So the vision, and I'll talk about nationally. So we talk about teacher leadership. Nationally on the landscape, it's about teachers still working with kids. Does that mean full-time? Not necessarily. So a lot of districts have created these hybrid roles where the person where a teacher leader is the teacher with kids, but coach and mentor and teacher resident and PLC coach, not all in the same day. Meaning they could be a teacher and a PLC coach, right? Or teacher and part instructional coach for literacy.
But right now, the current there's no compensation. We're a PLC coach, just to be.
So, I know, but the way other districts have done those roles well is that they marry those, so it's a different leadership stipend that goes along with the work. So I'm just gonna throw it out there. So Denver not only do you get paid as a teacher, but you get a teacher stipend and because you're truly a teacher leader. You're leading things within your classroom or you're leading things within the school building and on the district level. Right, exactly. So are we trying to get there? Absolutely. But we're in a place where the way we define teacher leadership is being a department head or facilitating people, right? Or facilitating PLC. I know that's what. But as we think about what the whole point is, how are they helping us move the needle next? How are we providing support to those people to do those roles with an expectation that when you do this role, we're gonna see an increase in it, right? Because we provided you training and support to do it. We provided you feedback along the way. So meaning it is a true role that we're helping to not evaluate, but provide you feedback for improvement. We've not done that. We've said, oh, you're the department head, now go lead. So we're trying to create these defined roles that we can truly say, in Winston-Salem Forsyth County Schools, here's what teacher leadership is. Here are the varied ways you can access teacher leadership. But here's our crawling phase, or our sitting up phase. We're sitting up right now. We were still in the bed. Now we're sitting up now. So bear with us on this journey. It's not perfect, but we're starting. And that's it. I'm just sorry. I guess because we've been talking about this for a while, that's it.
Other questions?
Now, I just also really appreciate the fact that if you don't know something that you're saying, we don't know, and we appreciate your feedback. When I was at GTN, they didn't know what they were doing half the time. And we got lots of, I turned in lesson plans, and they would send it back to me saying, oh, fix this. And I fixed it, oh, fix this. Then you fix this. But this is wrong on this lesson plan. And then it was just really frustrating because there was so much different stuff that they were telling me from one thing to another. So, thank you.
Talking the same language is helpful.
Yeah.
Well, we're just in it to start and then to grow. Because everything we learn from you helps us inform how we get better. So that's important.
So I'm going to wrap us up this afternoon. You have no idea how much we appreciate you taking time to come see us face to face or join us wherever you are. One day between here and spring break, we're very grateful for your time. If there were comments that you wanted to make or questions that you wanted to ask, I think there was a link. Am I right, Paula?
Yes, there is a today's meet and it'll be up for another week. So you go home tonight and you're like, man, I should have asked this. Type it right in there.
And we, honest to goodness, look at it. No kidding.
Yeah,
Yeah.
It's helping us to rethink some things that we need to clarify with the board the next time. Because it's been through first reading, but then there will be a second reading. Mine, Paula Wilson.
Amy Nail.
You probably see me on.
So we saw this just today.
Oh.
You were the feature video.
Woo! I'm here.
All right. Thank you all so much for your time this afternoon.
Everybody sign in the sign-in.